might explain what was really going on with the Doddleston messages. Well, I'll tell you what. Ken wrote about this in a book that he later sold. So let me tell you what I think. I think Ken made everything up. Maybe it started as a prank. Maybe someone was writing messages on his computer. And then he was like, this is a cool story. Let's just play it out and write it down to sell a book about it. And as I always say, like if you've written a book that's a bit and you want it to sell better, just say, this is a work of non-fiction. Bum, done, easy, boom. Tickety-boo. Sell that book. It's a case which certainly continues to inspire lengthy conjecture in lively social media groups and online forums, even nearly 40 years later. Some of the wackier theories include the idea that Ken had indeed tapped into a time portal via the medium of the BBC Micro, but that the Earth had been destroyed in the year 2109. The group of experimenters from the future were operating from a tachyon reality in a bid to change the course of history and prevent Earth's destruction. It's also speculated that Thomas Hayward, whom the 2109 described as not being what he seems, was not directly communicating from the year 1546, but who instead was either a ghostly spirit wandering restlessly around Meadow Cottage in 1985, or even a member of the 2109 with a different agenda. It might even have been the case that Lucas Wainman and Thomas Hayward were two entirely different entities, and whilst the 2109 were happy for Ken to chat with Lucas, they had serious objections to any communication with Thomas. Another slightly different theory is that Debbie had become an unwitting medium who was tapping into her dormant telekinesis skills to awaken spirits from the past and future who were mooching about in the astral plane. Yes, I mean, this is definitely possible because all of those things are real. They're not real. They're not real. It's just Ken made this up, didn't he? Ken wrote a story. It's quite interesting to note that one of the most frequent contributors to these long-winded online discussions is none other than ufologist Gary Rowe, or at least somebody going on to that name. Whilst Ken and Debbie seem to have largely retreated back into the shadows, Gary Rowe, if it is indeed the same man, which appears to be widely accepted, is happy to rabbit on until the cows come home. Unfortunately, seems to say anything remotely insightful. He keeps banging on about how he alone has those mind-blowing secret sealed messages from the 2109, but he's not allowed to share them with anyone under any circumstances. Sounds like he's just trolling, doesn't it? He kind of comes across as the annoying kid in the playground who wanders around chanting, "I know something you don't." Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Leaving aside the more outlandish theories for now, a more rational mind in search of a more plausible answer might naturally assume that this entire saga was just a hoax perpetrated by Ken Webster or others. They would they? It's a thought which we'll return to in a moment, but could there be any other possible explanation to explore first? I couldn't dig up any information about what Debbie did for a living, but it does seem odd that Ken Webster and Peter Trindle were two teachers who would surely have more important and worthwhile things to do with their time than orchestrate a long-running hoax. Unless, of course, it's true that teachers just get far too many holidays. Some of my best friends are teachers, and they just love it when I suggest that. They don't explode with indignant rage at all. I get the feeling that that's sarcasm. Although, like, my sister's a teacher, and so's her husband. And I think they enjoyed the longer holidays. They're not like, oh, we're always busy doing this. They're just like, well, it's quite nice. I mean, yes, they have to do work and stuff over the holidays. It's not like they actually get the same amount of time off as the kids. But I think the fact they do like the fact that they get quite a lot of time away from the school. According to his author's biography, Ken Webster has a rich background in business and economics and has held such titles as the head of innovation for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and visiting fellow at Cranfield University. He doesn't seem like the type to piss about for years on end. And some of the names that popped up in the Doddleston messages aren't necessarily just fictional characters created by a bored economics teacher. They do check out with a little digging into the history books. For example, there was a real Thomas Hayward who became the vicar in Gloucestershire between 1551 and 1554, though of course that doesn't mean it's the same person who was gifted a box of lights a few years earlier. On a slightly more compelling note, there was a sheriff on duty in Cheshire from 1529 onward by the name of Thomas Falshurst. The name is spelt slightly differently from the Sheriff Falhurst, who had Thomas Hayward arrested for witchcraft, but it's pronounced exactly the same. As for Peter Trindle, he was another highly respected teacher and language expert who put a great deal of effort into analysing the early messages from 1546 and reckons that it perfectly matched the dialect and spellings of the region at the time. He insists that it would have been impossible to replicate this language so authentically in every single message, particularly as many of the responses came through so quickly. So this leaves us with the only obvious conclusion left on the table. The BBC Model B was haunted. The only reasonable explanation, why is that? Is ghosts or something like that. It's just ghosts. It's just an excuse when you don't know. That's not quite as uncommon as you might think. I can remember the computers on display in my local branch of the electronics store Dixon's often portrayed signs of a mischievous, ghostly presence. There were times when every single computer monitor in that store displayed nothing but the words Dixon's Rob Dogs scrolling endlessly down the screen, particularly on Saturdays when all the kids were off school. Draw your own conclusions from that. Yeah, they're just going into start, display, screensaver, and doing the custom text thing. We're doing it at school. I remember every time there was like an open day, which is when potential people come around the